So we are honored and thrilled to have the Honorable Pauline Newman with us today. Judge Newman has served with distinction on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit since her appointment by President Ronald Reagan in 1984, where her thoughtful opinions and unwavering commitment to innovation have shaped the very foundation of modern patent law. Before joining the bench, she built a remarkable career as a research scientist, patent attorney, and corporate counsel, and has been a tireless champion for the importance of strong IP rights in driving progress, earning the admiration of colleagues, practitioners, and innovators worldwide. During World War II, she volunteered to fly airplanes across the English Channel. She served with UNESCO in helping underdeveloped nations with industrialization. She worked in Paris as a server in a pub, dated a Nobel laureate, and tutored an internationally renowned musician in chemistry. She led or was instrumental in the development of numerous professional organizations in both chemistry and the law. She served on 2 presidential commissions, fostered the formation of the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, and was the first judge appointed directly to that court. In 2022, she became the oldest full-time active judge in the U.S. history, and in 2024 celebrated 40 years on the bench. Wow. It is clear that you have led a fun-filled and rather adventurous life. Most people here, I bet, had no idea that you flew planes, and you have an airplane pilot's license. Tell us a little bit about that. How old were you when you started flying airplanes and got your license, and what led you to start flying planes in the first place?
Well, part of the story, part of the larger story that we'll get into will be that I was a child of World War II. And in high school, in World War II, everyone learned to fly a plane or to do whatever else one might do in expecting and anticipation and looking forward, of all things, to some sort of military service. As I think back in history, the patriotism, the incredible patriotism and devotion at that time has never been repeated, and as we have all of the agitation today with concern about what's going on in the world and the future, the past, the present, what's ahead for future generations, I think back to the essential simplicity in the way we all looked at World War II and the devotion as we all prepared. So I learned to fly when I was in high school, preparing. Women were already ferrying the bombers to England from the United States, from wherever they're being produced, because that was the easiest and cheapest way to get them to Europe, where then they would be used by the Air Force pilots to do whatever it was that they were learning to do. So it wasn't unusual. It wasn't special. And I appreciate very much that now, after all these years, it's remembered. I have no idea how it got back into the record, but apparently there is a...
She told me recently.
There's a lifelong record of people who have private pilot's licenses going back to the invention of the airplane. And it looked to me as if somehow, eventually, Google had got their hands on it, because the way it come back, the pilot with whom I took my aerobatics test when I continued my flying with the Yale Flying Club while I was in graduate school, having again started with essentially a learner's permit while I was in high school, was sort of part of the history that after 80 or 90 years and a long life crops up in surprise. But I do want to mention, since the subject has come up, it is flying a plane, especially a small plane, especially learning aerobatics and all of the games that pilots of small planes have learned to play with the fleecy clouds and so on, is just plain fun. I encourage you. So I kept my license current throughout much of the time when I was a judge. I would go to a small airport on the road to Annapolis every 3 months to keep my license current. And I would go up for a few hours with one of the hot pilots who was interested in sort of the games that we all had learned to play. And it was only after I lost my driver's license because of my eyesight that I stopped flying.
Wow. Yeah. Anyone else have a pilot's license? I mean, that's amazing. There's so many of us I know that would love to learn. That's incredible. But to think back then, it was commonplace that so many people were flying planes. That's incredible.
Well, it was, and there is a group called WASP, the Women's Air Force Pilots, that is sort of keeping the memory alive of the women. Several were killed in the course of ferrying the bombers across the Atlantic, or they were shot down, and or there were other difficulties. And to keep their memory alive, there's an airport called Avenger Field that has a tribute, an annual tribute to them that really does, again, remind us of those heroic days that live in memory.
Yeah, you had mentioned Rosie the Riveter and how women were just stepping up to the plate so much in World War II, so that's incredible. You are definitely a trailblazer, and so many women admire you and they look up to you, myself included, but so many of the women in this room do as well. We've talked about the challenges that women have faced in their career, and some of the women that were up here have been in their careers 25 and 30 years. She's double that. So, what led you into intellectual property, and what were some of the challenges that you faced as a woman back in the day when there were almost no women in this industry?
Again, the story isn't nearly so heroic. Those of my age and slightly older in World War II the women were recruited to do things that women had never done before. Even now, every once in a while, because it's such picturesque artwork, you may have seen the poster of Rosie the Riveter. There's Rosie flexing her, I guess that's the bicep, with a big smile. This was a recruiting
And I think
poster
she's holding a wrench, right?
in World War II. The planes, the rivets, the planes, you can't imagine how many millions of rivets it takes to put together an airplane hull that's supposed to withstand all of the stresses of military activity. The women, the girls and women were recruited. The boys and men were all in uniform. They were all in the armed forces. They were pulled out of high school and every place else. And the factory work, building the bombers, building the tanks, the company that I was with for a while made the Bradley tank. So I got to observe that structure as well as the airplanes. And so it wasn't a question of the women saying, I can do this, give me a chance, I want to work. It was, we need you. Nobody says you can't do it. We'll teach you how to do all of these things. This was the beginning of corporate daycare for women, that if they had small children at home that couldn't just be entrusted to the classroom, they were brought to the assembly lines for the jeeps and the tanks and the airplanes and everything else that was being done. A lot of the civilian mechanical activities, the trucks, the trains, were also assembled, and the machinery, the mechanics, was done by women who were recruited and persuaded and urged that we need you as a matter of patriotism and national defense and all else. So at that point, the women didn't have to do what it turned out they had to do later. They didn't have to sell themselves and say, I can do this as well as anybody else, just teach me how. So that environment was extraordinary. It only lasted for a few years because the culture, the Victorian culture that still prevailed during the war, was that women's role was as homemaker, housekeeper, looking after the children, bearing the family, not going out and working, whatever kind of work. And yet the need in World War II was so enormous. And the nation was preparing to invade Japan. It was before they knew that perhaps there was a weapon that could avoid that. And so they were recruiting, they were taking the boys out of high school, and every function that was being filled, military and civilian, women were being recruited to perform, and there was no question about, can I do this, or this isn't women's work, or get out of the way, this is man's work. It was just the other way around. So that was the environment that I grew up in. I didn't have to pound on a glass ceiling. I didn't have to do a lot of the things that did, to some extent, arise later because of the wartime circumstances.
Wow, that's not something I know for me, I've never thought of it in that way.
No.
So you had opportunities back then that later on you didn't have. So we took a step forward only to take a very giant leap backwards. Because like you said, after the war was over, then I guess we weren't good enough anymore. We needed you then, and that was great. So that's something we were talking about, is the culture. So in your many years, I know you've seen many changes in the culture. When you started your career, you were in the IP field. You were one of very few women in the workforce, let alone in the industry. And now here we are in a room full of very talented women within this traditionally male-dominated industry. So what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on the changes of the cultures for the year? Because again, I didn't realize that you had opportunities, and then those opportunities changed, and then we had opportunities. So kind of waves. What are your thoughts on that, and the changes that you've seen over the years, and technology and the culture and everything? Take it away. It's all yours.
In retrospect, as I've been thinking of this more or less recently, the cultural changes were enormously complicated. There was the Victorian culture that we had in the United States. There was the sense of the proper, correct role of women, the need for a female or for a presence, male or female, as children were growing up, was known. And the continuity combined with the powerful impetus to restore the jobs to the men and boys who were coming back if they hadn't died in the war and needed a job, that, of course, they should have priority. And the idea that the male member of the family is generally the head of the family was never questioned, any more than perhaps it's not questioned today. The complexities, the changes of the environment as the nation moved forward was in the midst of a whole bunch of other cultural changes. Due to World War II, there had been some fantastic developments in machinery, in innovation, in equipment, in an understanding of physics, chemistry, biology was starting to show that maybe it can be understood, and the promise of science for the future was large. At the same time, within the culture of the United States, there were limitations of space, limitations in graduate schools for the kinds of intellectual activities that were necessary to advance science and everything else that went with reestablishing a civilization after the war to end all wars and all else, in the combination of the euphoria and the enthusiasm and the optimism and the positive sense. There wasn't a sense of we're going to hold back womankind. It was more the opportunities that were presented and developing them. As opportunities appeared for me, I never had the sense that anyone was saying women are too dumb to do this work or anything else. But there were extreme cultural issues that were arising and that continued to arise. And for me, perhaps I was in the right place at the right time as I proceeded, as I studied chemistry in college and in graduate school, and found a job in chemical industry, although I had been hoping for a teaching job in universities with doing scientific research, because that was sort of the classic thing to do, and those jobs were very few. And I still remember that I looked at the roster of every research university in the nation, and there wasn't one woman on the faculty. And since I was just one of the mob, I thought that that was edifying as I sort of went about my business. But I have to say that I have been lucky. Opportunities arose that I hadn't expected, that were a surprise. I didn't intend, for example, after I'd been working in chemical industry for a while, I didn't intend to become a lawyer, but it turned out that I lived a couple of blocks from the NYU Law School on Washington Square, and they had night classes, and so I thought, well, I may as well stop by. That way I'll eat less pizza at Louis. If you know New York, at Sheridan Square, Louis was the local Italian restaurant that everyone could afford. And so I would stop there on my way home from work, and all these students coming from the law school would stop in after their night classes and talk about interesting things that I'd never heard of. my father was a lawyer, but he didn't talk about the law at home. He didn't feel that women were particularly supposed to seek careers here or there, but he didn't interfere. When there were bills that needed help, he helped. So a lot of what transpired in my life were fortuitous opportunities that turned up. I was looking, after I'd been in industry for a few years, I was looking for a teaching job again. I thought I'll find one, and I was interested in doing complex research in areas that neither I nor anyone else understood, because the atmosphere was that these are things that can be understood. It just takes someone with a persistence, the pertinacity, and I was pretty stubborn and persisting in sort of penetrating what might be learned. And so the offer to help to write the patent applications for the FMC Corporation came up out of the blue, out of a recruiting session at the Chemical Society, and I needed a job, and it was something that could start right away. And I knew about writing patent applications because I had a few inventions based on my work at the American Cyanamide Company. And there were people, generally drudges, known as not particularly good scientists. We won't give them a research job. We'll let them write someone else's inventions. So I was offered that job. And it's the kind of job that no self-respecting scientist would take. So I had no competition for it.
That was actually my next question, was to ask how you got into intellectual property. That's interesting.
Just by purely, I don't know, you can't really say this is a back door. This is just sort of the cellar door. It was, and the fact that it did turn out to be interesting enough, not so much writing the path. I soon, just the hierarchical structure was such that I soon had some assistance in doing the really hard work of writing the patent applications, and I would negotiate licenses or this and that. But it was the very beginning of that profession. I think you could hardly call it a profession. It was not viewed as a desirable activity for either a scientist or a lawyer. And meanwhile, I was going to law school at NYU, and that was interesting enough. But mostly, I was living in New York, and I was participating in the New York life as anyone my age might have been. So the time passed, and sort of here we are, without a master plan, because one of my messages for all of you is that with or without a master plan, there are so many interesting things, it turns out, in this activity, in this profession, in this combination of science and law, things that really, without this joint training that all of you have acquired, there really is not a population sufficiently skilled and talented to meet the nation's needs, and the nation's needs are enormous in this field.
So the reason I brought that question up was because earlier I was talking with Judge Newman, and she was just so in awe of this room full of just talented women in IP, especially considering when she joined IP, there were not very many women in the field at all. You have done so many things in your career and accomplished so many things. Is there a pivotal moment in your career or something that stands out to you most? Was it being appointed to the bench? What do you think is your greatest accomplishment or a pivotal moment in your life?
It probably was the recognition that if there are things that are needed, things that need to be done, just do it. I think as an example, although it wasn't the first example, the formation of the Federal Circuit, there were a lot of people, just about everyone in the profession grumbled and complained about the, I suppose the word is competency or understanding of the judges who decided patent cases, on the theory that they don't understand science and they don't understand innovation and they don't understand all of the constitutional purposes of intellectual property systems and what we need in order to move the nation along to take full advantage of this science, this burgeoning science of technological advance that's cropping up from all directions, is that we need to change the judicial system. And so for several years, I and a lot of other people in the bar would meet and we would grumble and we would complain. And then, and I don't really know exactly where the impetus came, say, never mind, we'll fix it. And that with the idea, all right, we'll get rid of all those judges in the regional circuits who don't understand science and therefore get their application of law wrong, and we'll put together a court staffed with judges that know better, that are adequately trained, and we'll get it right, and let's just do it. And we did it. We got wherever we could get advice, what do we do next? And working with the Congress, working with President Jimmy Carter, who gave us a president-level commission as a cover for this heresy of uprooting the federal judicial system. We took on the American Bar Association that testified against us with all of their big shots about what a wonderful system the circuit judge system is, where, yes, of course, there are circuit differences. That's what the nation is about, to have differences, and that's what the Supreme Court is for, and to get it right. That was their position. I testified on the other side and said we don't have time to wait, and we prevailed. I mention it now because, as I've said before, in recent weeks and months, I've pretty much concluded that I was wrong, and that the ABA was right, and that I should have left it alone. Because what's happened now to the Federal Circuit, where my colleagues have decided that since I'm such a pest, they're not going to let me hear any more cases, despite the Constitution, is so contrary to the nation's interest that it overrides whatever else we thought were the temporary benefits we were gaining. But that's another question, perhaps for another session. But the idea that it is possible to make change, all you have to do is devote yourself to it, was in many ways a revelation to me. I waited for things to come up from the bar associations or somehow from heaven, perhaps, wherever big ideas come from. And the fact that people who really know and care about the nation, are thoughtful, and really work at it, maybe can make a difference. And that's going full cycle to this session. This was one of the things that has struck me from your agenda these few days, that in talking about the things that aren't coming out quite right because of changes in technology, or that aren't coming out quite right because of diversions, fact-related diversions in judicial analysis, instead of, or addition to, I'm not saying that you shouldn't cope with it and comply with the law as it is, but don't stop there. Let's figure out what the law should be in every area in which it doesn't quite fit. And of course, the artificial intelligence stuff just shouts loudly for attention. The balance between copyright, trade secrets, and patents in that field of technology, so that we don't inherit obstacles, but rather enhance the evolution of these complexities. These are things that you people, not me anymore, I'm too far out of the loop of this technology, but you who work with it all the time and who see things that aren't quite right, who see where perhaps research in certain areas is not supported or not proceeded because of uncertainties in what the law would do, what the competitive situation would be, and all of the other considerations that are involved from day to day, to bring those considerations to bear to not only comply with the law, but to change the law when it needs change, and to get the changes, to get them right.
Excellent. So you sort of did what I was going to ask you for the last question, but I'll ask anyway. So looking at your career from start to now, do you have any advice, additional advice, or words of wisdom that you would like to share with this phenomenal audience of women?
I would say not to be complacent. Complacent is a poor word. Not to accept a situation that can be improved. And my lifetime experience has been that it's not so hard to make change that's needed to be done. There seems to be something, perhaps in our psyche, perhaps it's just a matter of our civilization, that we wait for the ideas to appear and then decide whether or not to support them. I think that life is too short to do that. The needs are too pressing, too urgent to wait for someone else to come up with the idea. So it takes organization, it takes time, it takes structure. It's not to everyone's taste, but for some people, it's very much to their taste. It turns out that it was to my taste. It seems I was born a troublemaker. That my mother told me that she discovered that when I was 3 months old. And apparently it's gotten into my DNA somehow. But overall, the nation is better served, I think, by the troublemakers with a little bit of energy and cooperation and collaboration.
I was actually just thinking that. The world is so much better because you were a troublemaker, so we appreciate that. You know, I explained this to you recently. Before, I told everybody earlier that when I met Jean, I didn't even know what intellectual property was, but I did know who Pauline Newman was. My husband raved about you, and I just was so honored to meet you, and I had you up on this pedestal, which she belongs on. as do many of us. But one of the other things I said earlier today is that people at all different levels, no matter how professional they are, no matter what level they're at, they're approachable. And you, by far, are one of the most approachable people that we've met. And Jean and I are blessed enough to consider you not just a colleague, but a friend. And we love having you be a part of our programs, and we really appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone here has really enjoyed hearing your conversation. Does anyone have any questions? We have time for maybe one or two questions, if anyone would like to ask some questions. Yes, go ahead, Erin. She asked did you ever have imposter syndrome?
Did I ever have a...
Yes, so we need to explain what that is. So was there ever a time in your career that you felt like you weren't good enough? I have a suspicion the answer is no. But but did you ever have a time in your career that you felt like you weren't good enough, or you really had to prove yourself to others? Is that a good way to put it? Yeah. See?
I'd like to find an example, because I think the true answer is I never had time to think about it. Mm-hmm. I had always, for one reason or another, or no reason, taken on more than I had time to handle. That didn't slow me down. I would get whatever assistance I could, of course. But if you are constantly busy doing things that you know, or at least think are important, if there are other things that get set aside, I don't remember ever being troubled by that concept.
That's actually great. Any other questions? They're asking, who was the musician that you tutored for chemistry? Remember
yes, I don't know how that got into the public record.
That was Rick.
Oh, okay. Well, there was at UNESCO, there was a professor of chemistry at some California college, I think it was Pomona, whose name was Al Baez, and his daughter was Joan Baez. And Joan was still in high school, but she had somehow, as a folk singer, had just taken off. But meanwhile, she wasn't quite 17, and she was getting a hard time from whoever gives such famous people a hard time that she had to get her high school degree. So her father, who I knew very well, we worked together, asked if during I guess it was Joan's summer vacation and my weekends, if I would tutor her in chemistry. And so I did. While I was tutoring her and reading chemical formulas, she would put them to music. And I don't know if she's still known as the famous folk singer that she was at the time, but at that time in the 1950s and 60s, she was a superstar.
So I hope you take this the right way. You seem like almost like the Forrest Gump character who was just like always there, you know, like there during desegregation, there when they landed on the moon, there when JFK was assassinated. I mean, you've done it all. I mean, like
yes.
I've known you how long, and I never knew the Joan Baez story.
Yeah.
I just found out that you have been a pilot. Up until a few years ago, you were still flying.
She just told us a couple weeks ago, so, yeah.
I mean, you are a national, I've written this and said that you're a national treasure, but that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface. We are so honored to have you here and so thankful for all that you've done for us and for the community. It's just, you've been a remarkable, I'm almost going to get emotional, you know, I mean, you've just been remarkable for everyone. And a great mentor to me and Renee. Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. You almost got me tearing.
I think there might have been one more question.
We have room for one more question. Anyone else? She's asking, what are the biggest challenges
that inventors are facing
these days with all the technology? Did I get that right? With all the technology and all the changes that have happened, what do you feel are some of the biggest challenges people are facing today? inventors are facing today?
It isn't so much inventors as it's the innovators. The investors. What I'm told through essentially the grapevine is that because of uncertainties in the law, which are generally blamed on the Federal Circuit, that the research investments that are made, the directions in which expenditures are made to advance technology in the nation are affected. Of course, they're affected by what you think might happen if your new product or process or method is infringed, whether it would make any difference, what it would cost you to enforce your rights, all of the things that go into any investment in new technology and in the research on which new technology, from which it might evolve, that all of that is at present subject to more uncertainty than it used to be, and that the reason for the additional uncertainty is the lack of confidence in the Federal Circuit, and as I mentioned, I'm extraordinarily sensitive to this because my colleagues on the Federal Circuit are not willing to allow me to perhaps dissent from any of their decisions. I'm not allowed to participate in the court's work. And with that background, whatever it tells us or suggests, or even if the suggestions are wrong about the judges that we have entrusted nationwide jurisdiction of innovation to, is something that I think is the greatest challenge. I have pretty much convinced myself that the innovation jurisdiction of the Federal Circuit should be returned to the regional circuits. The trials in the district court are still there. The PTAB is finding its way through all sorts of complexities that I think continue to show promise, but they have made the Federal Circuit superfluous, and that we no longer need a circuit court of scientific experts, which was the original hope, because the predecessor Court of Customs and Patent Appeals had developed that framework. So this is what concerns me, because if there is any validity at all to this concern, it needs attention. And so far, it has gotten just about no attention because, as it's been explained to me, practitioners don't want to get anyone mad at them.
Yeah, and I think it's especially detrimental that the most patent-friendly and innovator and inventor-friendly judge is no longer on the court to hear the cases. So, well, Judge, again, we're honored and humbled to have you here with us. And like Jean, I get emotional as well, because we're just so blessed to have her as part of our community, and to call you a friend. And we thank you so much for giving us your time. And it's been really fun getting to know more about you and beyond what we know in the books. And like Jean said, we didn't even know you were a pilot until recently. But
well, no, thank you for inviting me, and thanks to Watchdog for these excellent programs that you put together.
Well, thank you. Well, hopefully you'll be able to stay and join us for a cocktail.
Yes.
We are now adjourned. Hopefully you've enjoyed the program.